Hello everyone. Firstly, my name is Ben, introductions. I work for a company called ThinkMill. I don't know if you've heard of them. I basically write code, and I want to talk to you about things that we've been doing with Codesandbox and how we've been using it to just improve our developer workflow. Because we've been doing some really interesting things, we just wanted to share them with everyone. But I want to start off with, what is Codesandbox? I think this is a really important point because I've been experimenting with it a lot. I'm really excited about it, but not everyone has had a chance to play around with it. So I just wanted to introduce it in its creator's own words. So Codesandbox editor with a focus on sharing and reusing work with others. Now this is from the tweet where I've introduced it. If you've been following Codesandbox, you'll see that it's grown quite a bit. And let's just have a look at what that looks like. How are we going? That is way too big. That's a surprising problem to have. Nice. So the first thing that we want to notice when we're looking at how it's changed is it's not actually just React anymore. It's like Vue and Preact and Angular and Parcel. It's basically just now a place where you can come online and start editing code. And how much editing code? Well, you can literally come on, have your React components written up in here, and just start typing, and it live reloads, and typos happen. Because sometimes typos happen when you're typing with one hand. Yeah, that's better. So this is really, really neat. And it basically means that you can do a lot of work with your components online. There's a couple of other benefits that are really important to highlight when working with this as well. So I literally took this slide directly from Ives' talk at React Europe. If Codesandbox sounds super interesting to you, check it out. He goes in a lot more detail about why it's so amazing and all of the cool new features they're planning on adding. The first thing is that it lowers the learning curve. This is really important because it means that you can get up and running without having to go through any Webpack setup, without having to install anything, without having to think about Babel. You can basically go click open a new sandbox, open a React sandbox. It spins up a create React app instance for you, and you can immediately start typing. And then as soon as you start typing, you get to see the things reloading. So it just takes a lot of that burden of learning off the people who are like picking up a new framework. The other thing is it encourages sharing. A thing which I didn't note when I was looking at this is that it actually has, at the end here, a unique hash. If I go save this sandbox and then send the link to someone, they get to see the changes I've made. They can immediately go, yeah, React Sydney, that's who I should be thanking. And maybe if they're at a different event, they go, nah, gonna immediately edit it. They save it, they'll get a new hash, and they can send it back to me for whatever event they happen to be at. So the final thing, which I think is really interesting as a goal, is give a local editor experience. One of the things you often find if you're doing a lot of online editing is it's not quite the same as local deving. Like, it's fine, but there's just a couple of features lacking. And Ives has really been fleshing out with his team all of the small niceties. So for example, it runs jest tests. It works offline. Once you've opened a sandbox, if you keep deving in that sandbox and lose internet, that just continues to work. And yeah, it just really helps bridge the gap between deving locally and deving online. So we're going to take a brief detour through the AlexKit website. It's a very brief slide transition. So I've been spending the last year working on this website, and it's basically a documentation website for Atlassian's component library. And one of the things that we discovered when we first came to this library was there was a really good set of storybooks that came with it, but the storybooks weren't always the most user-friendly. One of the things we really saw early on was that you'd have a storybook where someone had written code that ran in the storybook, which included code snippets, which were technically how we recommended you run the code. But if you actually copied those code snippets and ran them in your own project, it wouldn't work. And that was just because of things getting out of date, just like those small lags where the person who'd been writing the demo code hadn't really been in line with the person writing the running code. And that's silly because you have a running demo of it at that point. So one of the things when we were re-architecting the website, which we were very, very clear on, was the idea you should just be able to click a button and view the source code that is actually running. So on the website, all of our examples have a really clear link where you can find any example that we're running, click on a button, immediately see how we're running it. And theoretically, you can just copy and paste this code into your own project, and as long as you have the right dependencies, checkbox and button here, it should just run. And everything is always that easy, except it's not. So then we come to things like avatar. It's a little bit more complicated component than button. And oh dear, we have this, which is an internal import. And cool, so you copy this into your code base and you get an error because example utils/helpers just can't be found. And our original comment was, well, flatten it. Why do you have an example helpers that this is pulling in so that it's just like obfuscating detail away from people? And for a little while we were like, yeah, flatten all the examples. It's going to work out. It's going to be great. And then we ran into this, where there's an image. Oh dear. You can't flatten the image into React, or you can, but it would make this example unreadable. So that just wasn't going to work out for us. So one of the things we looked at next was, OK, well, the idea is that you should be able to copy it anyway. If you can copy it anyway, you should be able to upload it to Codesandbox. What happens if, when we're uploading things to Codesandbox, we're just a little bit smarter about the things we grab? And here is where we find out whether my internet is working. Yes. So we built a button into the website, which, when you click it, it goes and queries Bitbucket, because of course it's Bitbucket, for the file in question, and then the contents of any files that this depends on. And then if we zoom out a bit and look over here, we find that we actually have included the helpers file, the actual content of the PNG, and this full avatar example that everything was relying on. Meanwhile, the actual example component that you were looking at, you can just see here. So you now have this really, really easy way of going from, I'm looking at some code, I'm seeing how it works, to just open it up and then immediately start mucking around with it. You don't have to worry about what your project's config is. You don't even have to worry about the fact that we're using helper utils, because this will go and grab the helper utils for you. So this has actually been great. And jumping back in here, hotkeys, how do the hotkeys work? Was it this hand? It was the other hand. So through our Liska website, we've been using Codesandbox. And we found 3 really, really big benefits to using this. The first is that it helps people explore the code. It means that it's really easy for someone who's coming to our library for the first time to just open up a sandbox and start deving on it. It's a little bit more involved than if they were just working in a REPL, where they could only pull in, for example, our examples. They can do whatever they want on top of the example that they've opened up from our website. The second thing is reporting bugs. This has been amazingly beneficial. I'm sure everyone has received a bug report, which is a GIF saying, this is what's going wrong. And you're like, cool, give me the code. And they give you the code, and you put the code into whatever your environment is. And you're like, that's not happening for me. And they're like, no, just like refresh it and then go back. And eventually you can find it. And you do that, and it doesn't work. And it takes up a lot of time. With this, we've been having people who report bugs just open up a sandbox, twiddle it around a bit, find out exactly what was going wrong, and send it to us and be like, here is the minimum sandbox which shows the bug that we're experiencing. And we go, great. And then we fix it because we can really easily see what it is. And occasionally we go, great, there's actually a bit of API you didn't know about. Here's the extra bit of API, and we'll update our docs, which is also great because it means that we're not sitting there going, but you can absolutely do that. And they're like, but we can't figure out how, which is on us as documenters, it's not on them. And the final thing is collaborating. Because we now have a really, really easy way to share code asynchronously with anyone else in the company, we can just get this really easy point where we can just get someone to throw up a sandbox, share what their thoughts are about it with us, and once they've shared information back with us, we can incorporate it into that workflow. The sandbox sits there as an artifact so that we have that going forward. We can link it to Jira tickets. We can dev off it. And once we've made changes, we can send a related sandbox back to them to check that the changes we've made are the changes that they want. So this has been really good for helping make sure that we're not just building components that we want to use, that we're building the components that everyone else wants to use. However, in this whole process, we actually needed a new way to upload to Codesandbox. Codesandbox has a really great API if you happen to be wanting to load a sandbox from a GitHub repo. It's got a fantastic dev workflow if you happen to want to start a new sandbox. And it's actually got a pretty good CLI if you happen to want to go from a local GitHub repo that happens to be a Create React app and upload that to Codesandbox. And that's all great, but that's not actually what we're doing here. What we're doing here is we want to pick a single file and then use that as an entry point. And we want to make sure that we're not pulling in anything else about the repo except the file we've targeted, its dependencies from NPM, and any other files it depends on. And then recursively from NPM and recursively other files, because you actually need everything. So introducing Codesandboxer, which is slightly different. Codesandboxer is a bit of a different thing because its goal is allow you to get any component you have written anywhere and put it on Codesandbox. The eventual goal is that you can just go, I've found a component somewhere, or I'm running a component, and just immediately get it up on Codesandbox, share it with someone, and get feedback. It's not going to interface with your Git workflow. It's just sort of like a prototyping thing, and it really helps with that whole process. So there's a bunch of different ways to use Codesandbox, which I'm just going to run through really quickly. Because we went a little bit mad from the original implementation, which is a React button. A React button is great. It queries Bitbucket and finds the individual file, then finds files based on that. And then from that, we built out GitHub as well, because we built a couple of documentation sites that relied on GitHub. So you can go out and query GitHub and find your example file, and then find all the files off that. Great, excellent. But the core logic that's going on here is much more about how you resolve a bunch of files and how you collect a bunch of dependencies, which is not really about a React button. So I split out the Codesandboxer bit of it from the React bit of it, and things got a little bit crazy. So the first thing is, as demonstrated, you can use Codesandboxer on your website. It's just an NPM package that you can add to your project, and you can run it super easy. If you have a bunch of examples that you want to be able to get people to have access to, you can just wrap the example code in this, point it at the right place, and it works. Second way is you can use it from your command line. And here's where we really get to test how well my internet's working. So we have a package where you can just run a command line entry, and it goes and bundles up all the files. I need to find how to get in and out of slides one day. So yeah, yarn global add Codesandboxer fs, and then Codesandboxer some path. It does exactly the same work, only slightly different. Did we get there? Yes. So it returns you a URL, which you can click on, which will just open up the sandbox of that file. And you may have noticed for the website, if you were paying really close attention, we're not pulling down the source here. And the really big difference here is that when you targeted a local project, it actually goes and pulls the entire source that's required for our components. This means that if you've gone and made a bunch of local changes, you can upload them using this, and you get all of the code. Which means that I can go make a bunch of changes, say, hey, is this the prop type you wanted added? Or, hey, I've made some color adjustments. Are these the color adjustments that are going to look right? Easily get it up from there. And then, because not everyone likes command line tools, maybe they want something a little bit easier, you can also do it from Atom. Now I can find it. There we go. And that'll just do that. And there's a VS Code plugin for it as well. If we jump back to my slides, which I'm going to have a fight with every single time to reopen one day. So yeah, there's just an Atom plugin and a VS Code plugin. Basically, same kind of thing. had some fun with this. I made our buttons rainbow so I could give our designers fits and send them like, hey, I made some ADG3 color compliant rainbow buttons. This is the kind of prop that we want to be adding to AtlasKit. And then the final place, because you should be able to do this from absolutely anywhere, is just from your browser. So you'll build a bookmarklet. And what that looks like is very, very simply, pages. You can drag the bookmarklet up here, view, have it open twice, file, which exports a React component. In this case, I picked an example from React Select. Just click the bookmarklet button, and it'll go and fetch the data if my internet hasn't died, and upload the example to Codesandbox, fetches the files, and then will redirect us to the running sandbox from that, which means that if you've got the bookmarklet installed, any component that you find on GitHub or Bitbucket that you're reading the code to, you can just immediately open in a sandbox and start actually mucking around with either deving on or trying to see how this would fit into your own project. So in summary, Codesandboxer allows you to deploy a component to Codesandbox from pretty much anywhere you can think of. Our goal is basically to make this as frictionless as possible. We've been finding it really useful as a prototyping tool. Basically, it allows us to much more easily share what we're doing with any devs. It means that we can do this before engaging in a full website build, which is a little bit heavier, and also make it really easy to point to the individual bits that people want to actually be accessing from the website. So a single example, here's what we changed, here's what you should look at. And we think that having the bookmarklet means that it's going to be a lot easier for other people to start picking this up as well and integrating it into their own workflows. Thanks for listening.